Okay, introduction. Steverson Moffat, District Manager, Blue Ridge Ranger District, Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. That's a good bit of title there. So he has, okay, BS. Okay, we all have BS. In natural sciences from the University of the South at Sewanee, a master's and from Clemson and a Ph.D. from North Carolina State University. From 2010 to 22, he was the environmental law compliance team leader for the Nantahala National Forest. Before that, he was a policy analyst for the Forest Service's Southern Research Station in New Orleans. So he's got that going too. He's married with 4 adult children, has been in Hayesville since the summer of 2010. So that's been a long time to be in there. Last October, he was going to give a presentation to our chapter on controlled burns, but was called away to help with Hurricane Helene. So we used his PowerPoint to share that information. We're glad to have him here this time. I'm just sorry that we weren't able to get more people here in person because of the parade and stuff. Okay, so anyway. Sorry? Okay, hopefully. Okay. There?
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Is this? Thank you. All right, I'm live. I have a green light. So I'm live, and
Do I take this off?
Yes, and I have a pulse as well. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last year. One of my collateral duties is on an incident management team, all hazard, mainly fire. But we wound up, this time last year, I was in a large conference room in the Harrah's Cherokee Casino with the rest of the incident management team trying to help the National Forest of North Carolina, saw out from the worst of the tree falls that occurred from Helene. Being a Hurricane Katrina survivor, that was a little bit of an interesting experience. But anyway, glad to be here today. I'm kicking it old school. I've got some notes, and when it's time, handouts. And rather than talk at you and do this number, this is an open situation. I'm going to be asking y'all some questions. Nobody had any pre-work to do, so it's not like I'm going to be, counting this for grades or anything. But just to free flow of information. If you got a question related to the talk, ask it. If you got a question not related to the talk, ask it. It won't throw me off. I just don't know if they're going to be able to hear the question, if I need to repeat it, or if you need to pass a microphone around.
That would be a good idea.
Repeat it.
Instead of trying to.
Yeah, no, that'll work. Okay, so a couple of caveats here, quick caveats. I work for the executive branch, okay? And I've worked for a little bit under Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, now Trump again. Be 26 years this November. And all the bureaus, if you're going to be working for a bureau, you got to somehow adjust to that. Some people adjust more happily than others. But I am in no way sharing information in this talk as some type of resistance movement or some type of pro-admin. I've got a task to be a good steward of the national forests and pass that off to people who are going to follow after me so that they can continue that work. And so that's my objective here. However, it has never been a more interesting time to be a federal government bureaucrat than under this current administration. Only recently here, they came in January, it's only been with like the past 3 weeks that they've allowed us to post to social media on our forest webpage without asking permission and being told no. So there's a high degree of scrutiny of what's going on. So my favor that I'm asking of you all is to please don't post me on social media. Please don't quote me. You can put the film on the website, but but just I've got 2 years to retirement, folks. I would really like to make it and not be voluntold to kick rocks. So so with that, driving down here this morning, I was thinking about when I was doing my undergrad. It was a mix of forestry, geology, ecology, and botany. And I had a really great professor named George Ramsher. He passed away about 1.5 years ago. But George's systematic botany class consisted of, over the course of the spring, you come into class and it's just plants in jars around the lab. And anybody seen the vascular manual of the flora of the Carolinas? It's a dichotomous key. It's about this thick, and it's very few line drawings in there, and it's a series of yes or no questions, and it's all in botany Latin. Is the leaf hirsute? Is the leaf acuminate? Is it serrate? All of these botany words you need to learn. And George wanted us to be able to identify families on site and identify genera on site. And then you'd key it out to species. But the way you would do this is you'd pick a plant, and you'd get a note card, and you'd write down, what you thought it was, and you'd take it to George, and George would look at your card, and he'd say wrong. And you'd go back to work. And so one of those classes, I thought I was a pretty good botanist, and I wrote down my plant name, and I took it to George, and George looked at it and said wrong. Like, well, yeah, that's George. So went back and wrong, 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 whole class. He keeps telling me I'm wrong. So finally, I'm just going to follow the key. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to guess. I'm not going to leap to conclusions, and went through all of the things. It was the first thing I keyed out. So I flipped the card over so he couldn't see that, wrote it down to get back to him, and said, there you go. George, I didn't call him George back then, but I flipped the card over and showed him, and George said, thank you. And I was like, George, what do you mean, thank you? And he said, well, early in my career, George was a year out from retirement then, I made a mistake. And ever since that day, I realized that I might make another. So thank you. Today was that day. So I may make some mistakes here, but we'll deal with it. So quick overview of the Forest Service. We are the only land management in the federal government that's not part of the Department of Interior. Okay. Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, the big ones, U.S. Geological Survey, they really don't manage land, but they impact land management. Those are all interior agencies. Okay, so Department of Agriculture, why are trees in agriculture? Because in the 1800s, when it was established, trees were considered a crop. Okay, you've got agriculture for growing crops. You've got silviculture for growing trees. Pennsylvania, Penns Woods, silviculture pertains to trees. And we've got a fairly unique mission, largely because of Gifford Pinchot, who was technically the first chief of the Forest Service. He wanted the maximum benefit for the most number of people for the longest time. It's the greatest good concept. But in that, we try to do a little bit of everything for everybody. We do, and it's a variety of things that codified it in the 1960s in the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act that gets abbreviated MUSIA, Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. But it's outdoor recreation. It's range. In the Western United States, big grazing allotments. We have, I think, one bit of range on the Oconee Ranger District down south. That's held over from a crazy outlier, but mostly out west. Outdoor recreation range, water, clean water has always been a focus of forest management, at least in terms of the U.S. National Forest. Fish, wildlife, and timber. Okay, so those are our things. So when you look at our other agencies, most of the realtors around here, if you've been shopping for land, they tell you that you border a national park, and there'll never be any management on the national forest because they tell you it's a national park. Well, they're wrong. But Park Service is just preservation. They don't. They do a little more prescribed fire. Actually, a lot of prescribed fire now, but they are not in. You won't find a shooting range on a national park. You will find shooting ranges on national forest. Um, there won't be a timber sale on the national park. You can't just camp anywhere on national park. National forest, you can disperse camp in most places. Find a spot where you want to pitch a tent, pitch a tent. You don't need a permit. Park Service, not so happy about that. Fish and Wildlife Service, they manage the wildlife refuges, and they do an awful lot of prescribed fire. But they're really set up more to regulate threatened and endangered species and wildlife than they are set up for big chunks of habitat management. Bureau of Land Management got everything that was left. So BLM lands out west, you'll see an awful lot of that. Big chunk of Nevada are BLM. Okay. And then there's one sister agency with the Forest Service. That's the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's some of you are looking around like, I never heard of them. Well, you've heard of the Soil Conservation Service? Okay, this is a classic example of mission creep. If you've got the Soil Conservation Service and you petition Congress for more money not related to soil, you're probably not going to get it. But if you change your name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, suddenly your mission widens out. So they do excellent work. I'm not knocking them. I think it's actually pretty genius what they did back in the day. But they assist private landowners. Forest Service, we just focus on the National Forest System side. Yeah, we'll do a little cooperative management with our neighbors in certain circumstances, usually related to fire. If you live adjacent to the National Forest and you want to do a prescribed burn, we'll work with the Georgia Forestry Commission and work together on that. And there are some agreements we have to do. But generally, if you have private land and you want assistance from a government agency, it's going to be the University of Georgia Agriculture Extension Service or their forestry extension program. So that's what we do. Quick overview of the Blue Ridge Ranger District. So I'm the district ranger, which means I stay in the office and got a staff of about 25 people, and they go and do things and actually do honest day's work while I sit at a computer and keep track of it. But we've got about 315,000 acres spread across 6 counties. We've got the southern end of the district is not too far from Ecology, and we got people that are driving down there. That's a lot of windshield time. But we've got parts of towns, Lumpkin, Gilmer, Fannin, Dawson, and Union counties is where we operate. I say about 315,000 acres because we've got one of the more active land acquisition programs of any national forest in the country. We got a special, I'm going to draw a blank on the name, but it's a Land and Water Conservation Fund money through our Georgia congressional delegation that allows us to acquire conservation-worthy parcels and attach those to our boundary. And at the same time, we've got a few outlying parcels scattered around, and I'll get into why we've got outlying parcels, but we have the authority to sell those. They're isolated, surrounded by farms. It's maybe a 50-acre, 100-acre chunk of national forest that was acquired back in the 30s, and it doesn't have the same conservation value to us. So we're growing, and that's a nice thing. But we're, some parts of the district, an hour and a half, other parts 2 hours from Atlanta. It's a heavily used recreation district, one of the more heavily visited in the country, outside of the ski forests out west. In 2019, we estimated a little over 3 million visitors a year, unique visitors. Now we're thinking that's closer to 3.5 to 4 million. Just during COVID, people got outdoors, rediscovered the national forest. And if you've been out trying to recreate with us, you pull up to the trailhead. If you're not there early in the morning, it's going to be hard to find a place to park because we designed that parking lot for 20 cars, and now there are 40 people wanting to drive in there and use it. So that's created some management challenges. You all were name checking some of our marquee properties. Brasstown Bald is one. That's a regional visitor center that's managed by a concessionaire, Find Outdoors. FIND is Forest Inspired Nature Discovery. They used to be called the Cradle of Forestry in North America, and it's a long story how they changed their name. But they do a great job up there. We are taking a close look at what we're going to do with that visitor center. It's pretty dated if you've been up inside it. Old museum exhibits from the 80s. There's been a lot of deferred maintenance up there. People go up there for the view, really not to look in a dated museum. So we're looking at the future of that place. But and then we spent, I don't know, $80,000 getting the elevator fixed, only 6 months later to have a lightning strike take it out again. So anyway, it's not cheap to operate. We got Springer Mountain, the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, up to Mount Katahdin. Gets tremendous use. That number of through hikers every year keeps growing and growing and growing. We got the Benton Mackay Trail, and additional segments of trail, but 359 miles of trail just on this district. Okay, but between those big marquee national scenic trails and our little self-maintained trails, we got 10 campgrounds. Morgan and Point and Lake Winfield Scott are also managed by Find Outdoors. But we've got DeSoto Falls, the Frank Gross Campground, Cooper Creek, Mulkey, Deep Hole, Dockery Lake, Jake and Bull, Sandy Bottoms, Dix Creek. Dispersed camping, you just drive along the creek. People set up fire rings, and there are spots where you can go, and then at Rock Creek. But it's a big portfolio, and 20.5 miles of OHV, UTV, ATV trail, Beasley Knob, where y'all have, and thank you for your work out there. That's a pretty impressive project y'all been engaged in. But we're trying to provide people with a designated area to drive those heavy pieces of equipment, whether they're the full 50-inch wide. Beasley Knob's the only public trail for a full-size Jeep in the state of Georgia. And then some that are just for dual sport bikes and ATVs. But we've got 3 of those areas: Beasley, Davenport, and Whisenhunt. And then we got 500 miles of National Forest System road. 500 miles. So 5 wildlife management areas that we co-manage with the Georgia DNR, and that's the Blue Ridge, Chestatee, Cooper Creek, Rich Mountain, and Swallows Creek WMAs. They're spread around. One of the first rangers, Arthur Woody, pioneered that wildlife management area system. Other forests in the south, the game lands, all national forests is game lands and managed jointly. In Georgia, only portions of. We've got the Toccoa River Canoe Trail. You can put in at Deep Hole and canoe the Toccoa River, and you take out, and this is probably the best named takeout in North American boating, because you finish your day at Sandy Bottoms. And I can tell you, you're sandy everywhere when you get out of that river trip. But it's a 13.8 mile trip. We've got 17 miles of mountain bike trails at Aska. We got 36 miles of mountain bike trails at Jake and Bull, and 36 miles of horse trail also at Jake and Bull. And you get a little conflict when you meet somebody on a horse when you're on a bike. But that's the way it works. And then we've got over 46,000 acres of wilderness. And wilderness is a special designation. The 1964 Wilderness Act. When we send the Georgia ATC trail volunteers up to do work on one of the AT shelters, if they're outside the wilderness, they can use a cordless drill. If they're inside the wilderness, they've got to use a screwdriver, because you can't have any motorized equipment in the wilderness. And a cordless drill, motorized equipment, yes, it's a little persnickety. And so, yeah, that's crosscut only. I can get a waiver for wildland fire suppression to use chainsaw. But when I was doing the environmental law compliance in North Carolina, got a call one day. There's an old road that goes down to Tate City. I don't know if y'all have heard of Tate City or not, but it's a well, you know, if this is the North Carolina line right here, I know I got white on white, forgive me. There's a part of North Carolina in Clay County that you got to drive to Georgia to get to, and you got to go through Tate City to get there. But there was an old road that came down through the southern Nantahala wilderness, and I got a call from a lady that was just real excited to let me know that she and her son had gotten a chainsaw and they were going to saw open that trail for us. It's like time out, can't do it, not with a chainsaw. Thank you very much. And then clean water. Just, and I'm not going to get into the hydrology of forests, but you got a largely closed canopy, leaves, you know, the raindrops get intercepted. You got, you know, leaves on the forest floor, root channels that filters water. And so the water that winds up in these headwater streams in these mountains is some of the cleanest water on planet Earth. And in the 1890s, when they called it the Organic Act, it established the reasons for the national forests. It actually lists clean water first, and then a sustainable timber supply second. So clean water is good for everybody. So last thing I want to talk about before we get into a little bit more here and some more free flow participation is budget. Okay, I used to be the district ranger, and there's a great, one of the classic studies in public administration research is called The Forest Ranger by an author named Kaufman. And used to be as a district ranger, they'd give my equivalent in the 1960s, 1930s, here's X thousand or X $million, Steverson, good luck, we'll see you next year. And I got to hire people, I got to fire people, I got to decide if I wanted to take a big chunk of that money and put it into my recreation program that year and really tighten things up there. And then maybe the next year it's going to go into roads. And maybe next year it'll go into, you know, the timber program or stream restoration, that sort of thing. I get job codes. They make the decisions now in Washington, D.C. and put that in a job code. And if that job code's for roads, that's all I can spend it on. I can't take money out of the roads chunk and say put it in the rec chunk if my roads are in good shape, which they're not. This is a hypothetical here. But I can't take that money and legally spend it outside of that job code. So I don't know, we got probably 30 job codes, you know, trails, wildlife and fish, water, roads, fire. Yeah, yeah.
So you've got Washington, D.C., who's not familiar with the specific needs of this area.
Yes.
Telling you what's going to be done.
Ish. So Greg's statement is I've got people in Washington, D.C. telling me what I can do with the district. And yes, they are not here. And that's ish. The reason I say ish is that they feed money to the regional office in Atlanta. And the regional office in Atlanta, for us, then parcels it out to the forest. You look at North Carolina, and they've got people, program managers in Atlanta that are talking to our program managers in Georgia, and they decide how much money to send the forest. And then as the forest decides how we're going to parcel that out. But let me give you an example. Okay, 500 miles of roads. How much money do you think I get a year to try to manage a 500-mile road network?
I don't know. 10 mil.
100,000? Yeah. Okay, and you think 10 million?
40,000.
40,000. Well, you're going to the Showcase Showdown. Is I get $50,000, $100 a mile. I can't touch every mile every year, even if I had all the money in the world, but it costs us to maintain a good mile, $4,000 a year, a good mile. okay? And I'm getting $100 a mile, all right? So, pardon me?
Probably not enough to fill a pothole.
Well, it's more than enough to fill a pothole, but you know, you look at, so when you look at erosion world, um, one of the things that keeps me up at night is worrying about dirt getting in the water because it's bad for fish, and we got some of the rarest aquatic ecosystems in the country. Um, and when you look at the trying to unpack a lot of things here, so when you think of a factory, there's a point source, there's a pipe that goes into water. That's called point source water pollution. Everything else that doesn't flow out of a pipe is called non-point source. And you look at the list of non-point source contributors, urban is number one, always urban, because any raindrop that hits this parking lot is going to flow somewhere and get into a storm drain, is going to flow into the creek out there in front of Home Depot, and then that's going to flow somewhere else. Very little of it gets channeled into a water treatment system. Then agriculture, just bare land, is going to erode. And then you've got 7 or 8 other things. And then at the last, before you get to natural sources of non-point source, is forestry. But within forestry, our roads are our number one contributor to getting dirt in the water. When the raindrops hit the gravel road, that takes particles and puts them in the cross drain ditches and then down into the creek. So, so for us to be able to keep that road in good shape, we we need to grade it. We need to add more gravel. But the roads were designed for a traffic load that doesn't include 3 million visitors a year. Those roads were built in the 40s and 50s and 60s and some in the 80s, but with a different purpose in mind. And we've just got a lot more users on them. So there's an example of my budget. And then you look at our staff. Overall, I'm 70% staffed going into this year at 70% of the people that I should have on the org chart. But that kind of, you break that down by program area. Right now, our fire team is fully staffed because a big chunk of the budget now is going to fire, both suppression and prescribed burning. And that's a good thing. But some of y'all know Laura Brown, the wildlife biologist. I should have 4 people working in wildlife based on my org chart. An assistant for her. She should be a GS11, and she's not yet. Should be. Not her fault. It's our fault. She should have an assistant and 2 technicians. And so I'm 25% staffed. We, 25% staffed in wildlife. We are 56% staffed in recreation. For this district of that size, those miles of trail, we've got 4 field-going rec technicians and a recreation manager. I should have 11 people in that group, really 12, but that's what I got. Right now, we don't have a timber management assistant who handles the timber contracting, and we'll get into the ecological benefits and drawbacks to that in a minute. And silviculture is that program, timber and silv, is less than 60% staffed. I've got one roads engineer to cover a 500-mile network, and he's trying to do both, repair work through our own equipment. And I don't have a motor grader anymore. I don't have a dedicated to engineering equipment operator. That equipment operator is in fire. Yes, when.
So are these shortfalls due to budget or availability of qualified people?
The shortfall is due to budget, but so we haven't had a budget. It's been continuing put the teeth back in. I think I've got my facts right here. We have not had a budget as a federal government since George W. Bush was president. Okay, it's all been continuing resolutions. And before they shifted to that approach, there was a really great website called Death and Taxes. And what these folks did was they took the federal budget and they had a poster, and they put circles on the poster that were sized proportionate to the amount of budget dollars that they got. So big circles for entitlement spending and a big circle for defense spending. And then they had also the discretionary spending. So the Forest Service is in that discretionary spending. We're in that like 11% of the federal budget that Congress can kind of play with, because they can't tweak, although they do, the entitlement spending, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of those programs. And they don't want to tinker with defense. And when I gave these talks, it was kind of fun because you could zoom in on that poster and you could show the USDA circle and then all the USDA programs in the Forest Service circle. It was right next to one of the Navy submarine circles. And one of the Navy submarine programs got slightly more money each year than the Forest Service did. So 191 million acres spread over 40 plus states. Less important to the budget makers than one submarine program. And I got a son who's a Marine and a son-in-law who's in the Navy. So I mean, I'm not knocking that, but it's choices. It's choices that we make, and the choice we're making right now is that we're going to fund other things at a higher level and leave the ranger districts to kind of make do. And so we've been making do. So we got some real challenges there in terms of people and budget and priorities and choices. So any questions about any of that before I start asking you questions? Yeah.
The observation I have is that you need engagement outside of government. You need engagement from millions of people like us.
Yeah, yeah. And we're
not only to talk about our congressmen, they need more money, but also to help out in those areas and be your eyes. Like
yeah.
There's a I don't know, there's a washout that really needs to be taken.
Yeah.
Your engineer can't possibly know about because
right.
of the storm that happened last night.
Yeah, yeah. So to kind of rephrase what Greg said, since I've got the microphone, it's volunteer engagement and ways to partner with the agency, either through contacting your congressional representative, congressional delegation, asking them to prioritize our budget, but also engaging with us as a volunteer basis. We are very fortunate. We've got a number of volunteer groups. The Georgia Appalachian Trail Club, the Appalachian Trail Club, Trout Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, Mountain High Hikers. We got y'all, Bent Mackay Trail Association. Yeah, there's a, and we do an annual estimation of the number of volunteer hours, and there's a standard formula for the value of a volunteer hour, and we're able to do the time, full time, and dollar equivalents, and it's significant, but we can always use more. And we've got blessed to have a partnership coordinator who's just as most competent, capable, pleasant individual, just perfect fit for that role. So we're looking constantly to increase those opportunities. So yeah. All right. We are in the wildlife habitat business. Now I think, let me backspace here. So you probably have heard that one of the national directives of the current administration is a nationwide increase in timber production at the rate of 25%. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Why do we manage timber on the national forest? Why do we do that? And the first point of that is that we are in the wildlife habitat business, not in the timber business, at least not this current Forest Service. The post-war Forest Service building houses for the baby boomers and the World War II greatest generation coming back to make houses, those days have gone. The environmental community had some very good objections to treating national forests like tree farms. And part of the reason that we were in that mindset, we're going to turn back the clock a minute. Forestry developed in Europe. And really, we typically, as people, care about things when they get scarce. Okay, so when you look at, the modern nations emerging from the Middle Ages in Europe, what do you got? You got relatively small land base. You've got forests are in the way of row crop agriculture. And you got to clear land and plow land to feed yourself, but also to feed the oxen and the draft horses. So you basically have to have twice as much land devoted to crop production to feed people and feed the animals that do the work. Wood is a building material. You see those beautiful Tudor-style houses where they got the wooden beams, timber frame construction with the plaster between them. They didn't do that because they thought that looked cool. They did that because there wasn't enough wood, because that was mud that they would put plaster on to try to keep from having it wash away. Is a fuel. If you want to be warm in the wintertime, you need to burn wood. And if you're going to be a player on the world stage, you needed a wooden navy. So that put a lot of pressure on forests, and they became scarce. I think we've heard people talk about, the president talk about in Europe, they rake the forest floor. Well, there are actually some forests in Germany where they literally do rake the forest floor, and they collect the twigs for kindling and they store them. It's a relatively small forest. You're not going to get away with it in this country. But there is some kernel of accuracy to his statement there. And the reason they do it is because it's scarce. So the first forester in the United States was Bernard Edward Furneaux, and he worked for the U.S. Forest Service before Gifford Pinchot. The Pinchot got his degree in France. He was from Pennsylvania. With a name like Pinchot, he had a French connection there. So he got his degree in France. There were no forestry schools in the U.S. We're talking 1890s here. And Pinchot came back and got a job managing the Biltmore State Forest, that before it became the Pisgah National Forest. After Vanderbilt died, his wife donated the chunk of that land to become the Pisgah. Shortly after that, Furneaux left, and Pinchot got hired to be the head forester, and he's the guy that decided to call it the chief. So Forest Service has a chief. Biltmore hired a forester from Germany named Carl Schenck, Schenck. And Schenck started the first forestry school in the United States in 1898, a few months before Furneaux went to Cornell and started the second one. Now, Cornell fired Furneaux because he did a demonstration clear cut in the Adirondack Park. And apparently, although it's a really great forest management tool, people really don't like clear cutting. And so, at any rate, he lost his job. But Schenck stayed on. And that time from that philosophy, maximum wood production per acre per year. Because you've got all this pressure with high population, relatively small land base, a lot of pressure on forests. So we're going to maximize, what we do in the absence of fire. Those Northern European forests, they might burn once a century. And when you take that to this land base, where we got more forests at the time than we knew what to do with, and the Southern Appalachians burn pretty frequently. The coastal plain burns every other year. The Rocky Mountain forest would have burned every other year. You have species that are adapted to fire, either with our longleaf pine, which sends down a really deep taproot and protects its cambium with a very thick bark layer that insulates it. A reproduction strategy that the plants, the baby trees, seedlings hang out in what they call the grass phase until that taproot develops. Then you get a fire that runs through, and then they'll grow as faster than that tripod in a year. And that's how, and hope to avoid a fire, and that regenerates. So you get a grassy understory. The forests in western parts of the U.S. may have had 70 trees to the acre. Through a century of fire suppression, 20th century, we preached that maximum wood production per acre per year forestry and every fire out by 10 a.m. And we've got now 1,000 stems per acre. They're all stuck like this, and when the fire runs through, everything burns. Okay, so what we need to do is thin these forests and burn the forests. But right now we don't have the people we need. We've still got a lot of distrustful people about our management, and folks don't like to see forests, mown down, in their perspective, chipped up, hauled off, burned. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that. So there we go. We new Forest Service. I got my degree in the late 80s. Yeah. And even when I was doing my master's degree in landscape ecosystem classification at Clemson University, they were teaching their undergraduates. Now, these folks were all going out to work for Weyerhaeuser in West Vaco on the coastal plain of South Carolina. Clear cut, roller chop. That's a big drum, like you see on the road crew where they're smoothing the asphalt. This has blades coming out of it, and so you drive that across the ground, and it breaks up the soil and it breaks up the slash. Clear cut, roller chop, burn, plant improved loblolly. You could sum up their softwood silviculture course in that. So it's taken us a while to get ecological restoration-minded foresters, ecosystem-minded foresters into the program, and that started in the U.S. Forest Service in the 70s. So we're in the habitat business, not the timber business. We do that habitat through prescribed fire. We can talk about that in a minute. Non-native invasive species control, mainly plants. So we're out there with herbicides. I think you guys would be okay with that. A lot of in-stream work, aquatic organism passage. We built our road system. We put these culverts in. Well, what happens is the culverts make it really hard for a fish to swim upstream. Either the culvert, is perched in such a way that instead of being level with the ground, it creates a waterfall rather than being level, or there's no boulders inside the culvert where a fish can hang out in an eddy and then work up and hang out and then work up. And that moving up that pipe is just, they can't swim against that current, some of them. So we're replacing a number of them with arched culverts that have a natural stream bottom. We're taking the what had been a round pipe, and we're installing ones that have been crushed. So they've got a wider intake and they get less velocity moving through them. We fell trees into the stream to mimic what would have been natural large wood in those streams that creates meanders and pools. We're doing bog restoration work, and we're removing dams that were built in the 60s and 70s to restore fish passage. And we do timber harvest. So 315,000 acre land base. How many acres of timber do you think gets cut on the Blue Ridge District in a given year?
You say 315,000?
315,000 acre land base. How many acres? 1% a year. Okay, so help the words guy. That would be 1%. I think we're at like 3,000. 10%,
right.
Yeah.
So let's say 3,000.
315.
3,150.
Yeah. So 3,150 is your guess. Okay.
Maybe 10%.
Maybe 10%. Okay.
In the national forest, I'd say less than that. Probably 5%.
Okay.
5%.
Yeah, I'm just talking about my district. So you're thinking 5. So you're thinking about 1,500 acres here on my unit. We had a big year this year. I sold 143 acres. 143. Of that, they harvested 51. They're going to harvest the other 92 this fall. Okay. So
So that's 0.1%, right?
it's 1/10 of 1%. Yeah. So not that I'm trying to do it, but if this was the forest here and I wanted to start up there and cut the whole thing and end up down here and go back to there to begin with, it'd take me 2,000 years at this rate. Okay. All right. So how long do our longest lived trees live in the Southern Appalachians?
Hardwoods, 150, 200 years.
Yeah. So some of the oaks will be 250, hickories 250, 300, hemlocks can get to 400. Um, and then half the forest is in what we call the unsuitable base, because back in the day we were a timber agency, and now we're not. So it was unsuitable for timber production. That's everything. That's wilderness areas, harvesting timber in wilderness, roadless. I can't keep up with the 500 miles I've got. I'm not going to propose new roads in roadless areas, even if they say, hey, you can go in there and work. Yeah, I could. I'm not. I've got 500 miles of road. The loggers don't like building new road, driving past nice stands of timber to drive way back in the middle of nowhere, because it costs them money to haul it out. It won't sell. Got special botanical areas, scenic areas, Appalachian Trail. I've got viewshed, scenic quality standards I got to meet. They can't really see the work from the trail, or it can't be highly noticeable from the trail. So half of that I can't get to. It's too wet, too rocky, too rough, too steep, whatever. Okay, so it's a 950-year rotation. Still, we're moving twice as slow as natural mortality. Okay, if I increase on this district by 25% to meet the national goal, that's 178 acres. Okay, so you're not likely to see a lot happening here. Partly that is we're not a wood basket. We are in the hole of the donut. Anybody going to fly? Where are you going? You're going to Atlanta. You're going to Chattanooga. You're driving at least 2 hours to get to an airport. It's the same thing for wood processing. This economy is turned from a agricultural and raw product economy to a more tourism-based retirement community economy. Our young people that want to work aren't wanting to work running a chainsaw, and they're usually not staying here. I've got 4 adult children, Marine, Coast Guard, married to a naval aviator, and a school teacher. And the closest one is in Norfolk, Virginia. So they're not here. So we don't have a lot of loggers anymore. They're all in their 50s. They're probably not going to be, and we're far from markets. So there's a lot of economic pressure. That said, we do have forests in the coastal plain. So you got and the Piedmont. So in North Carolina, that's the Sewanee National Forest in the Piedmont, the Croatan National Forest out near Camp Lejeune. We got the Oconee down here in the edge of the Piedmont, upper coastal plain, national forests in Mississippi, Alabama, Texas that are in these hugely active longleaf pine restoration program. And unscripted moment here. Actually, the whole thing's been slightly scripted. So we lost 90% of the longleaf out of the longleaf forests because we didn't understand the silvics of it, what makes it work. They'd plant a longleaf pine tree and it'd just sit there. And we didn't know that it was sending out a taproot. And we didn't know that it needed a fire to release and grow. And so we put a loblolly pine tree there or a slash pine tree and poof, there they go. Hey, look at that. But then they stop. They can't handle that deep sand, 80 inches of sand. So we're taking they're native species, but they're not where they ought to be, or they're in abundance like here, where you got white pines all over the ridges because we quit burning the ridges and we've lost our shortleaf pine component. Shortleaf's another tree that needs fire, the silvic, from a silvic's perspective. And so that's where the bulk of that increase in 25% for the southern region is going to come from. These coastal plain forests that are well adapted, they've got flatter terrain, they don't have the same endangered species component that we do here. They're working to restore that through fire. One of the most ecologically diverse communities on the world is the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem. When that thing is burned every other year, it's this tremendous meadow savanna set up. It's got more diversity than biodiversity in some parts of the rainforest. It's astounding. It's really worth checking out. Okay, 315,000 acres. Y'all thought it was around 1,500 to 3,000. I didn't ask you how many acres was too much because I got ahead of myself. Our typical, okay, describe the typical timber purchaser. This was a great one back in the 90s when you heard the environmental groups, timber harvest on the National Forest. What's a logger look like for me, for us? A logger. Yeah. Who's buying the timber?
People making cypress mulch.
If we had cypress, that would be, but in this area.
So it's not, it's not the big, logging companies like, Weyerhaeuser or.
Exactly.
Georgia-Pacific.
Right. Yeah. I've got.
So you're saying it's small, regional, community lumber companies.
Yeah. It's the logger that buys product from us right now has himself, 2 chainsaw operators that double, and 1 forwarder operator. So you cut the tree, you drag the tree over, you process the tree, you put it on a log truck, and it goes. He's got 6 employees, counting himself. Really small operation. We're not talking Weyerhaeuser, Westvaco, Bowater, Mead, Georgia-Pacific, all those companies. They're not, for the most part. And then if you do get a sawmill buying our timber, they don't have loggers. They contract with somebody typically that has like 5 employees. So it's providing an opportunity for somebody that wants to work here with that opportunity. But log truck, skidder, forwarder, or a loader, we're talking $1 million of equipment, unless he buys it used, and then it's not going to work so good. So it's not a exactly. We're watching. In our lifetimes, we'll see this business and this community probably cease. So there we go. It's not a wood basket. Very few loggers. Distance to mills and markets. Terrain and ecology. So we're going to see that shift to the coastal plain. So why would we bother selling the timber then? Why do we do that?
Well, it's a mechanism for, as you described, thinning.
Okay.
Thinning, which prevents the catastrophic losses that we have
Okay.
in no-control fire.
So I'm going to validate you. Greg's right. Thinning.
Wildlife quality.
Wildlife.
Yeah, so wildlife needs it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what? Water. Okay. But think about my budget for a second. Do I've got the staff and the money to go do my own timber harvesting? Okay. So we'll identify a stand that, for a variety of reasons, it's merchantable, because I'm sorry, I got to be able to sell it, or nobody's going to buy it. I used to call it Field of Dreams timber sales. Forest Service used to just put stuff out for sale and people would buy it. Back in the day, it doesn't work that way anymore, because the guy's got $1 million of equipment and he's got a loan and employees and mouths to feed, and he can't just take our logs as a favor. Then that individual or company buys the timber, and some of that money stays on the district. Some of it goes to the Treasury. And there are other ways I can massage this, and it gets into weeds of policy, where I can keep more of the receipts, retained receipts from that, and put that to habitat work. Okay? But somebody else is doing the work for us. to our standard, and it's a very high standard.
That makes it expensive for them to log the
It makes it very expensive for them. One of the things that we used to put in, and a lot of places still do, is that they've got to fix the road before they can get into the timber. So there's a roads package, and we deduct that from the value of the timber sale in many cases. In some parts of North Carolina has been experimenting with it. From a habitat standpoint, we need to move the wood from a location where the hauling costs exceed the value of the wood. And we're actually subsidizing the logger to pay for that haul cost because the value of the habitat is so much higher, in our opinion, than the value of that wood. So there's some weird math that happens, government math, but we return that to the Treasury. And then all of these rural counties, it used to be that they got a percentage of the timber sale to go to support the school system. Payment in lieu of taxes is what we called it. Now it's a different, with when timber really fell off in the 90s, it's no longer tied to that, but we do provide an annual payment to these counties to offset the loss of the tax base from having 50% of their land in there. Okay. So what are the benefits of timber harvesting? Ecological. Yeah, so here we go. This is the dead tree edition part of the talk. So simulating the effects of a big fire is what you're saying. That I would take that. So this is a. No, that's okay. It's good exercise. So what they're looking at is a table, and Taryn, I can send this to you if you wanted to post this on the web, or you can make a copy of it. So this is the breakdown of the age of the forest on the district, and some standard caveats down there. Our data, this looks right to me, but it's a little skewed because we don't collect the data like we used to. Just don't have the staff or the time to have people doing that work. But if you look down here, that big chunk at 112 to 121, that's the echo of the big increase in timber mining that happened up here. The reason they call that company Georgia Pacific is they started cutting in Georgia. They cut it all down, and they moved to the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of the national forests the reason that you look at the forests out west and they're these giant 1,000,000-acre tracts of completely non-checkerboarded, for the most part, property, is because that land was never, it was always in government ownership. Any Little House on the Prairie fans? Okay, so you remember, I'm talking the books here, but Pa had to file for a homestead, right? Well, that was the government was giving people farms. The deal was, we'll give you a farm, and you got to prove it up, right? Well, all the lands in the east had been gradually dispersed by the government. You heard of King's Grant to the people when there was a king. Then you had the Revolutionary War grants. Then the land that we took from the Cherokee and passed that out. Yeah, and then that worked its way across the Great Plains through the Homestead Acts, and then you got to the Rocky Mountains in the western U.S., and they were like, well, hey, we'll start taking this chunk and making this a national forest. We'll take this chunk, and so that was in the 1890s. 1911, Congressman Weeks passed a law called oddly enough, the Weeks Act, that allowed the government to buy back land in the east and to become national forests. So when you look at our ownership pattern on the road atlas, it looks like this big chunk of land. Well, that's actually just the proclamation boundary within which we can buy land. but we got this little checkerboard pattern all over the place. So um, um, at any rate, digression there, but um, a lot of those lands were clear cut and abandoned, and the government bought them back for pennies on the acre. One of the biggest sawmills operating in the country was up at Rainbow Springs. If you drive into Franklin and you cross the Nantahala River there on Highway 64, there's that little valley there. On the north side of the road, that was where Ritter Lumber Company had their sawmill. They had after the national forests were acquired, what was left in that area was a diameter limit cut. They had I think a 20-year contract was part of the deal from getting the land from them, and allowed them to keep cutting. So, so big timber extraction in these mountains, and then there's kind of an uptick here in the 40 to the 32 to the 51. There was a big push during the Reagan administration, a big increase in timber harvest, and then since then, really not much. So we really basically have 0% of the land base in this early successional habitat, which I would call, the 0 to 10 and 11 to 20 age classes. 0%. And gradually we're going to increase, as these stands increase, we're going to have an abundance of older forests too, and then that's going to start to fall apart, and we'll have some more young forests. So as I'm looking at this allocation as a land manager, I don't want this even across the board, but I would like to see some more younger forests coming on because it provides some special habitat, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also because when you get into does the term snow on the mountain mean anything to anybody botanically? Yeah, they call it snow on the mountain when the chestnuts bloom. You have these white flowers and this abundant American chestnut. And of course, the Endothea parasitica that we got from the Chinese chestnut wiped all of that chestnut out in the 30s and 40s for the most part. Oaks and hickories and chestnuts provide, the big nuts. The chestnut, insect pollinated, bloomed after the last frost, produced a super high protein nut and a reliable crop every year just about. Oaks and hickories, when do you see those catkins coming down? It's before the last frost date, right? They're wind pollinated, okay? So they're less reliable from a food crop standpoint. We lost 30 to 40% of the hard mast when we lost the chestnut. Oaks start producing acorns on average about age 40. They maximize their production between age 40 and 80, and then they decline. They'll still put out acorns, but not as much after age 80. So if I'm not putting, to make up for the chestnut, and hickory started about age 40 and they continued about 200. If I'm not putting some 0 to 20 year age class habitat down here, I'm not going to have oaks in that 40 to 80 year age class to provide that hard mast, to provide food for turkeys and deer and bears and everything else that relies on that ecosystem component. So I want to have some in here. And I want to protect the old forest for a variety of reasons as well. So benefits of timber harvesting, we get that early successional habitat. We get this age class and structural diversity. And by structure, we mean the height of the plants in the forest and how dense that vegetation is. You look out on an older stand, a closed canopy forest, is there a lot of understory?
No.
Typically not. But you look at everybody's got a yard to mow. What happens if you don't mow your yard for a month in this climate? You got a thicket, and if you don't mow it for 2 years, it's full of bushes. And that's great places for birds and insects and critters, small critters to hide. So that's that structural diversity component.
So can I interject?
Yes, please.
So as a landowner,
Yeah.
should we then be cutting certain trees? Should we be planting non-native Chinese chestnuts? I mean, these are some questions that would come to mind, like, oh God.
Yeah, no, please don't plant any Chinese chestnuts.
Well, good.
The American Chestnut Foundation is still trying to come up with a blight-resistant chestnut tree. They haven't cracked that, oh, pardon the pun, cracked that nut yet. But they had a 15th, 16th American to Chinese that showed really great promise in the lab, Nantahala parasitica. And we were planting test patches of that on the Nantahala, but it was susceptible to other blights and diseases that the Chinese chestnut is apparently a pure Chinese chestnut can handle, but the hybrid was weaker too. So we'd like to restore it. People are working on it. Is it going to happen? I don't know. What you can do as a landowner is certainly attempt to reduce, if you're not by a creek, reduce your white pine component. Okay, white pine is a native species, but it tended to be on lower elevations, closer to water, and out in the ridges and slopes on these lower elevation parts in our North Georgia area, and there would have been a shortleaf pine mixed hardwood community. So oaks, hickories, shortleaf pine, dogwood, little silver barrel, yellow poplar, red maple. Those that would have been kind of the big ones. Some black gum, that have been your heavy component. Those are more by the river, more by the water, naturally. And then you get in the higher elevations in the rich coves in North Carolina, and you're going to get more of the buckeyes and the sugar maples and northern hardwood forest up there. So that's something you can do, is reduce that white pine component. We would normally, when we had a more natural fire regime, we would have had that, would have been taken care of by fire. How am I doing on time? We good? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. No, I've got more to go. Just holler when you want me to stop. Yeah. Another question.
Is there any way, I mean, we have places that are so pristine or whatever, any way to know what it was like before we came?
No.
Because, we have areas that are
Mm.
wildlife reserves
Mhm.
and stuff, but are we reducing the natural fires that would have gone through, or how do we know what it was like before?
Yeah. So the question is, how do we know? Is there a way to know some point a couple of hundred years ago? I'm paraphrasing your question. Is there of some less impacted ecosystem, and do we have any examples of that left? So no and yes. And the reason it's a no and a yes is that yeah, there are some documented old growth stands, and there's a guy named Cliff Shaw, and Cliff's retired Forest Service. He's originally from Miami area, did his career out on the Sequoia National Forest, retired up here, and he's an old growth hunter, and he's really good at it. He's got a book on Amazon. If you look for Cliff Shaw old growth on Amazon, he's got a book of this area, maps, tells you how to find them, and they're really, really cool. Usually when you find old growth in the Southern Alps, it's in a ridgetop condition where it was too steep and remote for the loggers to get to. But Cliff has found some really great examples, and there are a lot of them on this district. But our coastal plain is so disturbed. The Piedmont is so disturbed. The rivers in the Piedmont used to have rocky bottoms to them. Okay, you drive through the Piedmont now, and you cross the bridge. You look out there. What color is that water? Brown. Okay, there was a hydrological study done. If we could magically stop all non-point source water pollution into the waters of the southern United States, take 2,000 years for the Piedmont rivers to flush the sediment out. Okay, so and then there's a lot of evidence that the Cherokee and the Muskogee and their ancestors set fires in these woods and had a big impact. Cliff Shaw has done a study on our volume. You know, how much of an acre of forest is being occupied by woody biomass. You know what that volume is, and it's twice as much or more than it was when the first foresters were doing studies out here in the 1910, 1920s. And it's largely due to fire suppression. And so in some areas we got a pretty good idea, but in a lot of areas we don't. Restoration ecologists are big on reference stands, trying to find an example that's been undisturbed. But then you get into the whole ball of yarn of this, you know, the Cherokee and the Muskogee use this land, and their ancestors use this land. I mean, are we talking 1491? It was, you know, when did, and then, you know, you start untangling other threads here. You know, we're been a part of ecosystems, you know, depending on whose book you read, you know, since day 3 or 4, excuse me, or, you know, the Leakeys would say, you know, since, you know, what, 4.5 million years in the Rift Valley in Africa. So, I don't know. We can certainly dial back to we can find something that's more aligned, and what the ecologists use today is within the natural range of historic variation. We know it would be, right now it's over here. We know it would be kind of somewhere in here. How do we steer it from this condition back that way? Yeah, Greg.
It sounds like since logging is not economically realistic anymore,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like the primary tool that the Forest Service has to, like you just described,
Mm-hmm.
you steer it, is going to be burns.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You got ahead. You're like on point number 9. I'm still.
I don't even have your notes.
I'm still on point 5. Maybe I'm on 6, but yeah. So what Greg's saying is he's made the jump that with logging trending downward, and our need to provide this habitat and to protect your homes, and to prevent a catastrophic situation like in 20. How many of y'all were here in 2016?
Oh,
Yeah. And we had all those arson fires up on the Nantahala. Yeah. Only one, the Boteler fire in Clay County, was a lightning strike, and that was quote unquote natural fire. But all the others on the Nantahala were arson. And here's a digression, but it's kind of interesting. So the Forest Service had gotten tips that there was a bear poaching organization, Haywood County, Buncombe County, Graham County, and so they did a undercover sting operation, and they called it Operation Something Brewing. I mean, good grief, BRUIN, Operation Something Brewing. Okay, and they got video of these guys trapping bears in barrels, bringing clients in from out of state, opening the door of the barrel, driving the bear out. The client may or may not have known that he was shooting a bear that had just recently been in a barrel. But they were poaching, they were selling animal parts, they were hunting out of season. It was a mess. And they got in there and they arrested all these people. They took their guns, they took their taxidermy, they were getting ready to law them good. And then the plaintiffs, the defense attorney, produced video of their undercover guy breaking the law. You can't be undercover and break the law. And so that threw the whole thing out. And these people were not happy. And so the reason you got the fire set in the Nantahala Gorge, that sent a message. The fire at the Joyce Kilmer that burned up the Maple Springs Overlook, it didn't get in the Memorial Grove, but it burned up the Maple Springs Overlook. That sent a message. The one that burned up Waya Bald and burned the roof off of the stone observation tower, that sent a message. These people were really good at setting a fire that was going to impact Forest Service infrastructure and take us a while to find it. So, so there you go. So yeah, we do need to increase the amount of prescribed burning. And that's going to be a challenge for a variety of reasons. Thinking back to April of 2024, I'm sitting in a training session in Washington, D.C., and Greg is texting me, "Who thought it'd be a good idea to approve prescribed burn on the day of the eclipse?" And I'm like, "Well, that was me." I thought that'd be good. But our models showed that the smoke would dissipate before the eclipse, and it did, right?
Yes, it did.
It did. So there you go.
Beautiful.
So there you go. But, we've got this large wildland urban interface here, and it's a pretty day in spring. And the reason we picked spring is that the biggest part of doing a controlled burn is controlling it. Okay, so we're looking for Goldilocks days. We need the fuel dry, but not too dry. We need the humidity low, but not too low. We need the transport winds high, but not too high. We want the mixing height to be up there. We want the smoke to get up and go away. But what happens is Tennessee burns, and yeah, their smoke gets up and goes away, and it comes over here and and drops on us. So we're constantly looking for something that's in prescription. Right now, to service our area, we've got one helicopter. The way we light these fires anymore is we'll put people on the ground to establish the control lines. And then there's we call them dragon eggs or ping pong balls. They're basically full of brake fluid type chemical, and they put in antifreeze type chemical, and that creates an exothermic reaction. And so there's a machine in the helicopter that injects the activator, and then that, if it works right, it's a tricky job. That rolls out and then falls on the ground, and within 2 or 3 minutes, it starts to ignite. And so we can, if you got a big, the side of a mountain here, I want a big hot fire, I can just drop a bunch of balls right down here, and you get this big head fire run up. Well, we usually don't want that, but we can drop balls here and let that back down, or we can drop them in far intervals, and then they burn and get a hotter fire, or you can drop them really close together, and you get them where they just expand, and then they hit each other and go out. So we got a lot of control when we use that system. We're now using UAS drones that have the dragon eggs on them. You got to be careful though. We were on an incident a couple of years ago, big fire, and one of the division supervisors asked for ping pong balls, figuring that ordering surely would know what he wanted was ignition spheres, and ordered a pallet of ping pong balls, and guess what they ordered? Pallet of ping pong balls that showed up. So anyway, it's so we need more drones, we need more helicopters, we need more people to protect your neighborhoods. We're going to need to do shaded fuel breaks around the edges, and so that it's going to involve some timber sales, and that's going to be controversial. So somebody asked what you can do as the Georgia Native Plant Society is really try to communicate with your neighbors when they see smoke in the springtime. And it's, we can subscribe to our burn alerts on the Chatto. You can contact me. I didn't bring any cards with me, but Greg can find me, and Taryn can find me. And then if it's a prescribed burn or wildfire. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a local group called Firewise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you ever involved with them as far as?
Yes. So she's asking about Firewise. So yes, the U.S. Forest Service partners with the Georgia Forestry Commission here and with the North Carolina Forest Service and all the other states about Firewise. Really, that's implemented through the state land grant schools, through the extension programs and the state forestry programs. But and I got a whole talk on Firewise, but you need defensible space around your home. They figured out ways that you can reduce the risk of fire to your home if you live in this wildland urban interface. We had a situation last year. A lady had a burn barrel in her backyard, and the wind gust came up and destroyed 3 of her neighbors' houses. And it's the least Firewise neighborhood I've ever been in my life. I was delivering meals. I don't do honest day's work on the fire line anymore, digging line and actually fighting the fire. But I did go to Mike's Seafood and get hamburgers and chicken strips to take to the firefighters for supper. And they said, meet us here. And I got up there. Unless you had a home in that neighborhood, there was no way to turn around. It was all 1-lane roads going straight up the mountain. And I wound up having to back down this thing. So if you're trying to get fire trucks up as people are coming down, it ain't going to happen. So Firewise encourages safer residential development. Your community, if it's in a situation like that, you really need to get an egress route. Another road where people know if there's a fire, go that way, so that the suppression resources can come in. But yeah, that's going to be your state. And firewise.org is going to have all the information you need and how to find your local folks. So.
In fact, I was in a neighborhood just on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
It was houses with no order, no safety, no defensible area around.
Yeah.
If that forest went up, that house was gone.
Yeah. We've got it's probably back in 2012, but it was in Clay County, and they benched out the home site, and the kind of the deck was here, and then it shows we caught the fire right at the edge of their deck. It's black all the way up to now. They had grass down this fill slope, but yeah, there was no defensible space, and we just got lucky. Yeah. So time, you need me to. Okay. Just the last thing I'll say about early successional habitat is just remember the benefits of that are bees. The letter B. Okay. You got browse, so we've got young shoots coming up where herbivores can eat. You got blooms because we've got flowering plants. So if you got blooms, you're going to have butterflies and bees, native pollinators. You're going to have bugs. You're going to have briars, and the briars you're going to have berries. Okay, and birds are going to come in and eat the bugs and eat the berries. So a lot of biodiversity there. Bats. If you're an echolocator, you'd much rather hunt in a clearing than hunt in the woods. So we actually have a greater number of bats using these small forest openings that result from timber harvest. And we have to do it very thoughtfully, protect endangered species, protect water, and protect the soil from compaction. So there's a lot to it. Apologize I didn't get through all the notes, but yeah, that's what we're about. And
Give us the 6 B's again.
Well, they're browse. I can leave you the note, Greg, if you want. Yeah, I'll just leave you. Browse, blooms, briars, berries, bugs, butterflies, bees, brush, birds, bats, and biodiversity. Yes. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.